we've used the term before. What is bias? Question? Favoring something. Okay. So I can be biased towards or against. But in this case, I want to think of that as an error, a mistake, right? Sometimes it's deliberate. I have been told I am biased substantially. I am. People who do work get good grades. People who don't. I'm biased, clearly, in favor of those that do good work. But that's deliberate. That's part of the algorithm I'm using to create this course. So let me be a little more pedantic about this. Now, I've put the word unfair here in quotes deliberately because to a lot of people, the definition of fair is I get what I want. So if I want to think of an unfair behavior, then I've got to think of where the error occurs. Most of the time, we have really two different ideas up here. The data collection, model design, the decision we make after that. The model design is really the algorithm. What did I choose to be my predictors? How am I going about the method of designing and establishing whatever our effects are here to make the decisions I want to use? So I can have the bias that's inherent in the algorithm itself, a methodological bias. So this is part of the design. When I put together design I want to use, this is the place that I'm going to see this sort of bias show. Now, that doesn't have to be in some AI algorithm. This can be in the algorithm I'm doing. This can be in my methodology. But it's part of what am I looking for. On the other hand, there's data bias. This is flawed data, incomplete data, used to build the model, to train the models in our AIs to do the analysis we're doing. So based off of this idea, we've seen examples of this already. My goal is to identify, address bias in a reasonable fashion to mitigate the effects of these biases unless they are necessary to the system. So what sort of data biases are reasonable? Sampling bias. If I train my algorithm on data from some particular group, some industry, where I have salary information, years of experience information, if I try and look at those pieces from engineers, and then I go to use that to hire business managers, are they equivalent? The data might not carry over appropriately. I might end up hiring business managers that look a lot like my engineers because I've trained my data on the engineers. Measurement bias. The guidelines for certain exposures to particular chemicals change over time. And so there is a quite reasonable chance that if I take a healthcare treatment algorithm and I train it on the data from 15 years ago, it might not be effective today because those exposure levels and requested requirements aren't up to date. I changed the safe, acceptable exposure to whatever drug or environmental stressor I'm looking at. Now I have a problem. I mentioned this last week, I believe. It was a conference they were talking about the futures, coffee futures. And when they looked at purchasing coffee futures, they'd looked at 32 years worth of data, but they hadn't brought it to common dollars. So inflation was an issue. Now they were just comparing models against each other. But if I tried to predict in today's dollars, I've been using dollars from 1990, inflation plays a big role there. And so in that fashion, I have historical bias. There is no data on women's credit card spending from before 1975. Anybody know why? They couldn't have credit cards. Banks only issued credit cards to the husbands. No woman could get a credit card on her own until 1976. So there is literally zero data on women's spending habits before 1975. Same reason there's no listings or historical data on purchases of automobiles before 1976. No lender would establish a line of credit without a husband's co-signature. If I'm looking at the history of household spending, and I want to go back to the 1940s, 1950s, I have a problem. My records are going to vary substantially on gender basis. If I train my model on such data, I lose accuracy. The inequalities brought forward continue to reflect that same sort of historical data. Yeah, I expel. You may or may not have already heard of this one in your English classes. What's confirmation bias? Your research methods class might have talked about this. Yes.
Basically, you kind of look for evidence that already supports your existing theories and hypotheses.
And there's another piece to that. I keep looking for stuff that supports what I already have. And I ignore the stuff that works against it. I don't know how many of you have seen the meme. A woman talking about how bad vaccines are. And somebody pulls out, if Google were a person, a giant stack of paper and thud. All of these studies say vaccines are perfectly fine. There's one piece of paper that says it's bad. She goes, thank you, and walks out the room. Confirmation bias says I'm going to look for the data I want to see. Ignore or minimize any data that's not in my belief system. But some of these biases are not necessarily visible to us until we do different analysis of the data. A hiring algorithm based on names may have difficulty looking at names outside the training database. If those are American names, then all the foreign names are going to sound weird to it, and they're going to move. It's very unusual. One of the hiring algorithms we'll talk about a little later, somebody submitted the exact same resume under 3 different names. And the Americanized male name got the top ranking. Credit scores are influenced by zip code. Does that make sense? That what zip code you live in affects your credit score? That's an example of a historical bias. Most people from a particular depressed neighborhood or a particular gentrified neighborhood had particular credit scores. Now I can align those two pieces. They go together, so I can predict a credit score based on where you live. Okay. So how do I mitigate this stuff? How do I address and hopefully fix some of this? I need to make sure I have truly representative samples. Now, this requires some substantial understanding of what the population is. I need to know all the different characteristics in my population that I want to make sure I account for in my analysis. So, in a lot of cases, I need some sort of large census first, where I understand who or what is in the entire population before I go about sampling it. An audit, post hoc examination of what happened. You did this prediction. How close were you? Do it again. Even if you do the same data, do you get exactly the same results every time? Ideally, your models should have some sort of noise in them to allow for a little bit of adjustment. But if you continuously see, Carson, as you put it, a skewed result favoring something or against something, you want to ask, is that deliberate? Is that part, or is that unconscious? Inherent in the model? Is that actually what's there? I have 23 years worth of data at Seton Hill that tells me that attendance and grades go together. I had a student about a decade ago whom I saw on the first day of class, on the day of each of the exams, and at the final. He got a B. In a 3-day-a-week course, I saw him 5 times out of 43 possible. Interestingly enough, he would come to the exam with all the homework he hadn't turned in for the chapters that were on the exam. Just like in this course, you look carefully, there's no stated late policy. He's like, here, I graded it. And the next semester, the syllabus had a late policy in it. The homework would slide under my door randomly. The day it was due, but sometime that day. He got to see that semester. Again, I only saw him 5 times. I saw him 6 times that semester because I moved one of the exams. And he wasn't in class to know the exam had been moved. So he showed up on what he thought was the exam day, saw it wasn't the exam, got up and walked out. I had this kid 5 straight semesters. B, C, C minus, D, F. But is it possible to do well without coming to class? Absolutely. But they're related. I need to check that. To mitigate bias, it helps to be able to explain exactly what your algorithm is doing. If I don't know what it's doing, then I have no way of being able to say, oh, this result is explained by this piece of the algorithm. I need to know what the decision markers are. People who skip more than 50% of my classes have rarely earned above a C. So there's a marker I can say. You missed more than half the semester, you don't think you're going to do well. However, I am one person. And what I see in my classes may not be what other faculty see in their class. Maybe I have a blind spot. And I see people's faces more. I recognize them. I know their names. I grade their papers differently. It's possible. In classes where I have a lot of handwritten submissions, I get to know people's handwriting. This is why I'm glad you all do course evaluations in typed format. I can't recognize anybody's handwriting anymore. But I need to be able to see what other people see rather than just what I see. So I need a bigger team. I need a diverse set of perspectives to be able to check for those blind spots. I need to do all of this stuff before I start making decisions that are public facing. This should all be done in the testing phases. If I'm going to deploy an algorithm and let this loose in the public sphere, I need to have done all of this beforehand. I then need to do it again after the fact so that I can say, oh, here are some things we didn't see the first time. All of this is predicated on my having some established ethical guidelines. So I need to have some ethical framework I'm hanging my hat on here. Whatever that is. The guidelines for the industry. Questions? How many of you have taken any sort of statistics class prior to this? A number of you. What is correlation? There's a bunch of equations that go into correlation. I don't care about those. What's the idea of mean? You just use the word to define the word. I can't help that. I can't use correlate to define correlation. So what does it mean to have things that correlate with each other? I'll give you influence. I'm not sure effect is the piece I want to use. Joe, you adding to that?
No.
Okay. So how can I if I want to say influence, but I want to say cause? What terminology can I use there instead? I'm going to use part of the word instead of the whole word. Related means that they should be somehow working together, as you said, influencing each other. But there may be some other thing that affects both of them. Did you know that hand size is correlated with your score on the SAT? Because when I gave the SAT to the first graders and all of their little hands, they couldn't even bubble in the bubbles right. Low scores with small hands, big hands get higher scores. No, that's not a but they are correlated. They are related to each other. That doesn't mean I give Shaquille O'Neal a PhD because he can palm a basketball. He doesn't get an 800 in math because he can dunk. On the other hand, that other piece says causal interference. When I am looking at correlative behaviors, my goal is to find out if there's cause. When I see correlation, that does not give me a cause, but it can help me look to see if there is cause and effect. There may not be a direct behavior that links these two. I showed you that website last week, spuriouscorrelations.com, right? Those things can be related to each other, but there's no cause and effect there. There might be some third variable that I am blind to at the moment that allows me to find cause to both of these items. Such a thing is called a confounding variable. It is frequently, well, okay, let me rephrase that, start that over. If I make a change to the system and something good happens, how do I know whether or not the change I made caused that good thing? it needs to be the only change in the system. If you make more than one change at any given point in time, then I might not be able to say which change caused the effect to happen. I increase ad spending. I launch a social media campaign. The campaign happens to go viral. Which one increased my website traffic more? I have no idea. I got an A on this paper. I got a B on the previous one. What did I do differently? Can I do it again? I'm wearing my lucky socks. That must have been it when I turned in the paper. If I want to figure out cause and effect, I need rigorous standards. Things like randomized controlled trials. A randomized controlled trial, this is the gold standard, by the way, takes your group of objects, people, whatever, randomly assigns them to two groups. One where the change is made, one where the change is not made, and everything else about it is exactly the same. If that's the only change in the system, then I can say that difference is responsible for any difference in effect I see. Almost all medical trials are conducted this way. They are also almost always what is called double blind. Does anybody know what the phrase double blind trial means? Unfortunately, no. In this case, the blindness refers to knowing about the group. The researchers don't know who's in the control group, people where nothing was changed, and who's in the experimental group where something was changed. And neither do the people. So the researcher is blind to who's in which group, and the people are blind to whether they're in the experiment group or the control group. In medical trials, this means that you have to give everybody a pill, even if the pill contains 0 active ingredient of the drug that you're testing. So the control group gets a pill that does nothing, a pill that has no active ingredient in it, and the experimental group gets Miracle Wonder Drug 7, whatever that happens to be. Randomized control can be blind, can be not blind, depending on the type of research being done. But a randomized controlled trial that is double blind is considered the quote unquote gold standard for trying to establish cause and effect. That isn't always feasible. It is quite possible that I will have someone with knowledge as part of the group, or somehow that leaks. And sometimes I simply can't have a control group. The change has to be in the whole system or not. Well, then I can't look at current group not undergoing, current group undergoing. I have to look at the past group that didn't undergo this change and the new group that does undergo the change. So I have to look at difference within data set, difference within difference. I have some variation in the group that didn't have the event or effect and the group that does, and I'll compare those pre-treatment, post-treatment groups. Quite frequently, we'll look for a test that I can say, hey, I believe this is the influencing variable, something that is going to cause one of these two things to happen, but not the other one. Then I'll add that to the setting. Sometimes we get a cutoff score. Okay. I'm going to assume you all are really good students and no one in this room has ever been on academic probation other than me. There's a cutoff score for academic probation. If I can look at that cutoff score and say, people who are on this side of the cutoff score get these things, do they help or not? Well, people who are just above that cutoff score don't get that effect. They don't get those support systems. So let's look at people just on either side of the cutoff. The same thing happens, again, in drug design or other randomized testing. If there's a cutoff, whether you do this treatment or not, let's look at people on either side of the cutoff and see if our treatment is effective. Lots of other control methods exist where we can do a weighted average of a bunch of different tests. I know you've heard this phrase before. If it hadn't been for item X, then we wouldn't, or we would be at, if the pandemic hadn't happened, then insert effect here. Once I have these sorts of things, I can create what are called causal diagrams, where I can put together ideas and events and literally create a picture. This is a subset of the idea of a group of math called graph theory. And we can identify variables that are in between, things that mediate our cause and effect. Please note that just because something happens after doesn't mean it was caused by what happened before. If event Y follows event X, it doesn't mean that event X caused event Y. I could overfit my model. Remember our data snooping idea. There are variables that stay hidden from us. Perspectives we don't see. So we need to define our causal assumptions and design our test appropriately. There are lots and lots and lots of good software choices here. A lot of the programming side of this includes studies done in Python, in R, in Stata, in Jamovi, and lots of other software packages. Questions? If I want to make sure I'm working with data appropriately, then I need to look carefully at some examples of things that have gotten effed up. You leave a giant pile of data behind you online regularly. How often do you curate it? How often do you Google yourself and find out what other people see of you? Have you ever done that? I'm going to add a bonus homework. You should go Google yourself. You should take the time to look at what things are out there that are known about you. I'm going to run into ethical dilemmas where I have to decide what to do with the data, and that's going to end up in some sort of trade-off. I need to keep track of a lot of ideas in here. What is privacy breach? In data terms. Say again? It could be. It could be invading and taking over, but it could be as simple as your screen was left on when you stepped away from your computer and somebody's looking at the file on the screen, right? It's an exposure of information that we didn't want to have happen. Whether it is done maliciously or not, the use of data wasn't authorized, or the data is being used in a not approved fashion, but it's just data got taken from one source and used in another way. The way in which I prevent such a thing, I hope, is through the idea of informed consent. So, what's that? Felix? That's, if I give you the data, then you can use it, right? People allowing the data to be used is part of this. But there's a little more. I consent, I give you the data. What's the informed part here? that I know what happens to it. I have to know and agree to the purposes you're going to use this data for. And the informed part here is the harder part. A lot of people just click the checkbox and off we go, right? This goes back to reading that giant pager 12 of software license agreement. But I have to know what you're going to do with my data. I have to agree that that is what I allow my data to be used for. And ideally, nothing else. And so to go along with that, it makes sense for me to think about data minimization. If I need to answer a particular question, then I really should only be collecting data that's related to that question. If I want to know about number of hours spent studying, then I'm pretty sure asking questions about your dietary habits won't necessarily be related, will it? And then I would have all sorts of other data that's stored in my database that I might use for something else, or that could escape in such privacy breach and get out and then be taken to be used by someone else. If I don't need that data, why should I ask those questions? I want to know about your study habits. I'm going to ask about your sexual activity. Those don't go together at all, do they? And then, again, I need to talk about following the law. Data sovereignty means I have to follow the laws both in the places where the data is used and in the places where the data is collected. I need to follow the laws and governance structures of the nations that gave me the data. And then all of this needs to be explainable to human beings, because last time I checked, we're all humans. And if I can't have a person in the loop to make the decisions, if I don't have accountability in here, then I could very well be in a position where it doesn't matter what the algorithm is doing. I do not worship at the feet of it. There's a person that's got to be responsible. I would like you all to tell me how many of you have a Facebook account, even if you gave it up. Have you taken a quiz on your Facebook account? What kind of flower are you? What season are you? Have you ever seen this sort of crap? Back in 2012, in the youth of Facebook, a company called Cambridge Analytica asked people to take a quiz. And doing so, linked an app to your Facebook account. For 6 years, 12 to 18, Cambridge Analytica harvested personal data from over 87 million profiles on Facebook. Their stated claim was that they were going to give you a funny quiz. That was it. That was all they said they were going to do. Cambridge Analytica lied through their teeth. They were actually collecting information off your news feed and the stories you read and the amount of time you read them. And then they sold that advertisement. In 2016, they sold the data to two different Republican political campaigns. Marco Rubio and Donald Trump. And they knew who to advertise to, because they knew who read which kinds of stories and who clicked on which kinds of advertisements. And they could put targeted ads in front of you. When you get something for free, you're the product being sold. Cambridge Analytica was fined hundreds of millions of dollars. They settled for about 1% and then disappeared. So we had a lack of transparency here. We had unlawful use because they were literally spying on you without telling you about it. And they then sold that data, again, without telling you. This is not all that long ago, people. When it ended. Let's see, if you're a freshman now, you would have been in grade school. Again, this idea is not new. When Amazon decided to create an algorithm to scan resumes, it used its past 10 years of hiring. By the way, this is for corporate, not for the warehouse. When Amazon looked at resumes for corporate hiring, and it looked at the past 10 years, who do you think had been hired the most often at Amazon corporate in the past 10 years? If you were to walk into Amazon corporate headquarters, who would you expect to see a lot of? What kind of people would you be looking at? Geeks. Other than that. You'd see almost exclusively male engineers. That meant that those were the people that got hired. When they looked at resumes, the algorithm downgraded any resume, not by name, but by school and by activity. If you were a member of the women's rowing crew, your resume lost 2 points. If you went to a women's only school, your resume lost 5 points. It didn't push male scores up, but it very much pushed female scores down. This perpetuated the historical bias that only hired men in the, well, mostly men in the last 10 years. So those were the resumes that must be the good ones to hire. How do we mitigate this? What should we have done at Amazon to prevent this sort of thing from continuing?
Like test the algorithm first before using it.
Or even after using it, right? I don't have to just test it beforehand. I should have, but I need to test it afterwards as well. So there's a hiring score that comes out. I need to compare it to other information about the groups. I need to audit what's going on. Removing gender indicators from a resume is not enough. Women's resumes, far often between the age of 24 and 35, have a work gap. Why?
Maybe like parenting.
Parenting. Women between the ages of 24 and 35 are most likely to be parents sometime in that point, and unfortunately, still societally, are most often the primary homebound parent, and are thus going to have a work gap, but the men aren't. So it isn't enough, because there are hidden confounding variables that indicate gender in a resume. Even if you stripped every male or female word out. Your college of record, your undergraduate institution, is a women's school. Seton Hill University. It's only been co-ed since the 80s. Historically, this is still a women's college. That's an indicator, even if nowhere else on your resume said male or female in any fashion. Seton Hill's an indicator. Most of the time. I mentioned this one before, but there was actually a lawsuit again, not all that long ago. If you go shopping and you look at purchase data, Target noticed women buy lotion more often than men buy lotion. Women tend to buy unscented lotions and unscented deodorants when they get pregnant, because scent is a trigger for morning sickness. And a lot of scents set women off very easily. They were able to correlate purchases and purchase history with the chance that someone was pregnant. I wrote it down. Unscented lotions, extra supplements, oversized purses that could be used as diaper bags. The consent to use your purchasing data was murky at best back then. And they would shove coupons out at the register or send targeted mailers to houses, and a father got one of these for his 19-year-old daughter. Diapers, cribs, strollers, advertisements. He hadn't been told she was pregnant yet. He sued. Made the news. If you Google Target pregnancy prediction, you'll find the news story. And then she told him, and he immediately dropped the suit and apologized on national TV. This is a case where data minimization would have been useful. Rather than extrapolate from the data randomly, we only use it to track and examine directly. Who knows this website? What do? What's Zillow known for? Houses. In 2017, Zillow tried to get in to the housing market. Rather than just be a realtor and post information, they created what was known as the iBuyer program. You wanted to sell your house? You listed it. Zillow scooped up the information and made you an offer. You could, according to Zillow, list your home, sell it to them based on their estimates of your neighborhood in 24 hours without ever seeing a human being. All you had to have was the appropriate information. Now, that went with their estimating of prices for the neighborhoods they were looking at. And they did an AI analysis of neighborhoods to try and predict how much your house would sell for. This program died a horrible death in 2021 because something happened in 2019, kind of screwed up the housing market. What? COVID tore the housing market completely upside down. And they were unable to give good estimates. They overvalued the prediction in the housing market. They lost $500 million. And the reason was there was no explainability of the algorithm. The pricing algorithm was a black box. They didn't know how it worked. The same thing, by the way, happened to Google. In 2013, Google used to offer this service called a flu tracker. Every time somebody would Google symptoms related to flu, they would say, oh, flu must be increasing in that area. Problem. Most human beings don't know if they have the flu or a cold. And so they would Google the symptoms and have a cold, not the flu. Google overestimated the flu in 2013 by 140%. And focusing only on the last 2 years of data because they'd only started this in 2011. So they didn't have enough training data. They overfit the data and it blew the model out of the water. Let's get more recent. In 2024, in the European Union, there was an election in Slovakia in which a recording was released to the news of the main candidate saying, I've got this election in the bag, I've rigged it. And discussing with his Minister of Finance to be how they're going to raise the price of beer. There was just one problem. The entire recording was AI generated. A deepfake is an audio or video created by artificial intelligence by fitting an audio track to someone's voice. How many samples of your voice do you think I need to be able to create a recording that sounds just like you? Actually, I need more than one, unfortunately. I need about 10 minutes worth of audio. Now, I record all of my lectures, right? So this voice that I'm doing here in this classroom, that can be faked fairly easily. I don't record video of me. I'm seeing this camera, so they're not going to be able to put it to my face. At the same time this was happening in the EU, in New Hampshire, Joe Biden called a number of people and said, don't go to the primaries. Again, it was a complete fake. It changed the outcome in Slovakia. It didn't change the outcome in New Hampshire. But satire is legally protected. If I want to do an imitation of someone, I can do that. But if I try and release it as them, I am breaking the law. Dana Carvey did amazing impersonations of George W. Bush. Okay, but he didn't try and look like George Bush. He just tried to impersonate the way he sounded on Saturday Night Live. Right now, there is legislation in front of Congress to require AI-generated content tags. But if you get on Instagram today, there are entire bands, models, and whole movies where not a single human being was used. How many of you saw any of the Matrix movies? Really? 2 hands in this room? Okay. There's a lot of martial arts in the Matrix movies, right? In the second Matrix movie, there's a giant fight scene at a club. One of the actors asked to be in the martial arts section of that fight was Jet Li. Jet Li refused because they were going to motion capture to do all the bullet time special effects. And they were going to own it. And that meant they could recreate his movements using computer-generated animation. He literally said, no, I'm the only one who gets to own me. Who here owns an iPhone? An iPad? I see a whole bunch of MacBooks in front of me. How many of you have photos on those devices? In 2015, Apple proposed a scan of iPhotos. In order to look for child sexual abuse materials. This makes sense, doesn't it? You don't want to see people posting pictures of child sexual abuse. This is a bad thing. Yet Apple was not able to do this because it would have meant that every single picture you take, they would have scanned. Whether you uploaded it or not, whether you deleted it or not, if it was ever on your phone, they'd get to keep it. And it would be tagged. Location, time it was taken, and your phone's ID. Privacy experts went nuts and said you're trying to steal all the data. The program was dropped in 2022. They kept trying to get this through, but they couldn't. That's a hell of a trade-off to make, isn't it? Privacy versus exposing child sexual abuse. Okay, this is old, 2002. I think I wrote that down right. 2006. Netflix offered prizes and said, if you can predict people's recommendations and scores on movies better than we can, we'll pay you $1 million. The only thing you get is anonymized data of the movies somebody's already watched. You have to predict their scores on those movies. You have to predict what they're going to score on the next movie. Hundreds of thousands of pieces of data. In 2009, a company called Belcore won. But in 2007, two researchers at the University of Texas in Austin took the data set from Netflix and went to IMDb and looked at the ratings that appeared in Netflix and that appeared on IMDb and tried to put them together. Ratings on IMDb are not anonymous. Ratings in Netflix's data pile were supposed to be anonymous, and they stripped the anonymity away. 4 of the Netflix users filed a class action suit. Our data was supposed to be anonymous. How dare you? It was settled, by the way, in 2010. It is possible to make this a lot harder with statistical analyses, but these are real events. Anybody here take a criminal justice course? Which one, Helene? With Blake Fiocco, right? Okay. She talks about this idea in that course, an intro to criminal justice. The corrections officer management profiling for alternate sanctions, COMPAS. This is a recidivism score. If you look at a person in jail now, what's the likelihood if you let them out, they're going back to jail? This algorithm attempted to predict that. It was built in 1998. In 2016, the algorithm predicted a person in Minnesota, I believe. Sorry, Wisconsin. Would reoffend and go back to jail, and that person was denied parole. They sued. Because the algorithm can't be cross-examined. A judge, a witness. We have a constitutional right in this country to face our accusers. A parole board you can ask questions to, but you can't ask the algorithm a damn thing. By the way, the Wisconsin Supreme Court upheld the use of COMPAS scores in limited behavior. So again, explainability is a requirement. I can't just say, no, you're not allowed out of jail because you might do it again. The recent lawsuits against TikTok, Meta, Facebook, all of those things go hand in hand here. I mentioned the idea before about driverless cars. A driverless car causes an accident. Let's actually do this the easy way. The driverless car stops in the middle of the road and gets hit. The people inside the car that stopped, the driverless car, suffer whiplash. One of them is thrown against the seat back in front of them and injures, breaks their nose, whatever. Why did the car stop? Because their map said there was a crosswalk there. You have to stop the crosswalks. There was no crosswalk painted on the street because they'd repaved 3 months earlier and hadn't gotten around to painting it yet. Who's liable for the injuries? Now, this is an edge case. But these are the sorts of things that are currently in front of the courts. I have to balance the safety of the community against the innovation of a driverless vehicle. I need to make sure that these real life events that have happened and can continue to happen are not going to happen on my watch. On Thursday, we're going to look at a sample data set for biases. The project for this section. Here's the data set. Here are the outcomes. We're going to look at a hiring algorithm. You have to tell me what biases you think are in that data set, in that algorithm. In addition to that, a week from today, what's special about a week from today? That's the celebration of scholarship. We don't have class. I decided you should still be doing something for me. So I put up a bonus assignment. It's listed in the first module, the main module, rather than any of the others. And it's due on Thursday the 30th. So not this coming 2 days from now, but Thursday after the day off. I will see you all on Thursday to do the project. Have a wonderful rest of your day.